Okay.
Right, have you, excuse me. Yes, I am a little bit sick. Sorry, everybody, if I'm sniffling into the mic a bit. Um, yeah, thank you for having me. I'll take a second to introduce myself because I think I'm a new face for a lot of people here. Um, I've never been to an in-person birders night before, and I'm sad that I can't be up there with you all. This is going to be less fun, but hopefully still fun for everybody. Yeah, as Anne said, the first draft of this presentation was done almost a year ago today, and I'm so happy to be here presenting to you all and grateful to Anne for giving me the third chance at doing this presentation and sharing this work with everybody. Um, so I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name is Hannah Hickli. I'm presenting right now from Lekwungen territories, which is where I grew up. I have been a bird watcher for about 4 or 5 years now, and the beginning of this presentation starts with a bit about the UVic Birding Club, because the whole story starts there. And yeah, I work in habitat restoration, so a lot of my main day job, I'm thinking about things a bit larger scale, and this work that I get to do yearly in the spring and winter takes me to a smaller scale, thinking about individual species and their impact on the habitat and ecosystem. Um, I will get started sharing. Look, don't look, don't look. Bunch of spoilers. There we go. All right. Yeah, so this is a presentation surrounding the herring spawn. It'll be bird focused, but kind of the core of it all is, well, the core of it all is the fish and also the people and also the place. So there's going to be a bit of everything. Um, this is a picture of Hesquiat from the porch of our field house. I'll give you an outline of what we'll be looking at today really quickly. Nobody wants to spend too long talking about what we're going to talk about, but I'll intro with a bit of background on this kind of research arm of the UVic Birding Club that we've established that's gone on to produce this data on the herring spawn. But we actually started doing marbled murrelet surveys in Hesquiat. So I will talk about our first year as a small community-driven and funded research unit. The next 3 years will be about the herring spawn in Hesquiat, 3 years of data from that ecological phenomenon. I'll talk about how we collect data on the herring spawn. So what actual surveys look like, how do we do them, how do we count birds, what kind of data are we looking for? And then once you've waded through all that, I will talk about the actual birds and kind of give a spotlight on some of the big players in the spawn. I'll talk about the trends that we saw, a bit of stuff about the trends that we saw in our data, but it's not going to be too much data, I promise. It's mostly pictures. And then I'll finish up with some other interesting sightings from Hesquiat to kind of round out the ecological profile of this place. And hopefully by the end of it, you will have a better idea of how this really, really tiny peninsula halfway up Vancouver Island gets to be in the top 10 highest birded spots in Canada yearly in March, which is the picture on the left. Hesquiat is number 8 of hotspots in Canada. So some friends and I started the UVic Birding Club in 2021. Namely, the people who started it were Thompson Higgin, Rebecca Reederly, and Amadeo Cortese, and also myself and Ava Noringseth and Liam Reagan. And we started it because some of us were long-term birders, had started when we were really young. Some of us were just getting into it in Victoria, but we all noticed that there wasn't really a stronghold for youth to get in touch with birding culture in Victoria. There's, of course, Rocky Point Bird Observatory, but it's fairly far. and the University of Victoria has not had a ornithology program since Western screech owls were prominent on campus in the 80s and 90s. So we started the UVic Birding Club um, hoping to attract more young people into the hobby, and we did a pretty good job. We hosted a lot of events that brought a lot of people out, even if it was really early. I would say if I could go back, I would do less 8 a.m. birding meetups because I think that it would have been a nicer segue into this very stressful, sometimes on your body and sleep cycle hobby to do more at 12 p.m. But nonetheless, we went out a lot in the morning and a lot in the pouring rain just to get numbers on the board for a big day. We also went out on boats, rented quite a few boats out of Petter Bay Arena. We took some trips to Rocky Point to look at the bird banding programs there. There's a picture of a bunch of UVic birding folks taking a picture of a northern saw-whet in the owl banding program. And this defined a lot of my undergraduate life. Up in the top left corner is a picture of me begging my friends for an apology because I can't stay out bar hopping because tomorrow was World Migratory Bird Day. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we met a lot of faces. I still see people that I met in the UVic Birding Club, and that was all great. But we weren't satisfied with that because we knew we had all these resources, and we had these community connections, and we really wanted to be able to connect young people who are just starting their careers with not just a hobby, but something that can be an entry into a career. Birding is great in that way. The hobby itself and the career of ornithology are really connected. A lot of birders are ornithologists. And so we wanted to start a research project, start an arm of research to get young people involved. And so our first idea was, well, if we want to start a project, we might as well go big. We're going to circumnavigate Vancouver Island. We're going to take a boat, circumnavigate Vancouver Island, and we're going to visit every important bird area on the coast and perform a one-day survey there to update any ornithological data that needs updating, and more on important bird areas later. So really just a really small goal to start with. We thought that, we could probably get this done in maybe 40 days, wouldn't be a big deal. We could do it over spring break, maybe. And during this time, some important questions came up while we were trying to think through what this could look like, including where will we live? Does anybody know where to rent a boat that like 5 to 10 people can live on for about 40 days? And, oh, that's going to be really expensive, actually. Last one is more of a comment than a question. And all of this beautiful dreaming did end up not culminating in a circumnavigation of Vancouver Island. It turned out to be a little bit too big for our breeches. And so instead, we shrunk our focus down a little bit, and we started a project in Hesquiat, soon to be the core of this research program. And it started with actually marbled murrelet research. The connection that we had in Hesquiat was an IBA caretaker named Diane Ignis, who had noticed some worrying landslides in the area and messaged BC Nature, who is the kind of coordinator for the IBA program here, and said, hey, do you have anybody who would be willing to come out here and take a look at things? And Liam Reagan said, yeah, I think I know some people, and contacted us at the UVic Birding Club. So Hesquiat is designated as an important bird area for the abundance of breeding marbled murrelets there, but there had not been surveys done since the 90s, over 25 years. The last data was older than I am. And so we wanted to take our budding birders with a lot of passion, but not a lot of skills out there, because it didn't seem like anybody else was going to. And so 5 of us got together and we were trained on a methodology by Bernard Schroeder, who taught us how to survey for marbled murrelets. This is the marbled murrelet radar methodology that we used. It's heavily informed by Alan Berger's work in the 90s. And this, at the time, was the best standard for surveying marbled murrelets. There's other ways to do it now if you have access to their inland breeding areas. This was kind of like the easiest way that we could think of doing this was going in by boat, setting up a marine radar on top of the boat, and surveying marbled murrelets with the radar technology. That document is long, and I'm a fan of condensing things, especially into meme format. So this is the condensed version of all of that technical jargon. If anybody knows The Simpsons, this is a reference to that. You sit in front of a radar for 3 hours at 3 a.m. counting these birds, and you want coffee more than you had packed that morning when you got up groggily at 2 to get the boat out to your radar to your survey spot. You want to go back to bed, but all you can do is think about how much these adorable little seabirds need you to count them so that they can hopefully get protections for their breeding areas. There's a really cute photo in there of a baby, a juvenile marbled murrelet that is so well camouflaged against the boughs of the trees that they nest on. So what we were doing was looking at the screen for this marine radar, which we had set up on the top of the boat and which we were careful not to go near, and just catching anything that came in. So these lines, kind of blobs that you can see on the radar screen are marbled murrelets. There's definitely 2, possibly 3 in this screen grab, if you can see those kind of tracks of blobs moving across the screen. And despite the logging and landslides that had occurred in the area, we had 398 detections of marbled murrelets, which is not the same as a direct measure of abundance, but it's still really good data, and it was enough to continue to support the designation of this IBA for marbled murrelet, significant marbled murrelet breeding presence. So that was really exciting. And we came back with good connections in Hesquiat, and we really wanted to go back the next year and do more. I've mentioned this word important bird area a couple of times, and I'm going to a couple of times more, so I'll break it down for you now. The important bird area framework is what we based our work upon, and it operates under 2 assumptions. The first is that despite any bird species range being usually very large, that's not necessarily a representation of how evenly they are distributed throughout that range. So there are areas where there are higher concentrations of any given bird species, and that can be because they have breeding sites or because there are really important foraging sites, maybe like a herring spawn, that concentrate any given species of birds. And the important bird area is a line, an imaginary line drawn around that area that we think has a higher concentration. There's also a newer framework being implemented, kind of being birthed out of the important bird area called the Key Biodiversity Area, or KBA. And this is the same thing, but for biodiversity. So despite large habitats, large ranges of things, there are some sites that have more concentrated areas of biodiversity. And this is a map of important bird areas are in red in this map. So you can see this is scattered all throughout Canada. There's a lot along the coast, but there's also some in the interior, especially in Alberta. And the yellow and blue are legal designations of protected areas. So an IBA doesn't mean that there's a legal protection for the area, but it does support research, and it often supports these further protected areas that have actually important legal basis to their protections. So that's the framework that we were working under, and it brought us here to Hesquiat. This is a picture from the porch that we performed a sea watch every morning. And Hesquiat is a kind of mid Vancouver Island. Is pretty much like splat halfway down the middle of Vancouver Island on the west coast. The zoomed in part of this map shows the undisputed territories of the Hesquiat. And this picture is taken from this little orange dot on the left, if you can even see that far. Hesquiat is interesting. One thing you might notice on this map, a lot of the west coast of Vancouver Island is kind of fairly parallel to each other. Like despite a lot of fjords, there's not a lot sticking out. And Hesquiat is the first kind of arm that is jutting out into the Pacific. And it's the second furthest peninsula of land relative to the rest of Vancouver Island on the island, the first being the Brooks Peninsula. But Hesquiat really just sticks out into the ocean, and it makes for really interesting habitats and also an interesting ecology because of its place so far out into the Pacific. It catches all sorts of things on currents and on winds that are coming from the south. There's a variety of habitats in Hesquiat, and this is one of my favorites. It kind of scattered throughout the coast are these really interesting sandstone washes. And it's just at low tide, a very, very long sandstone beach with interesting geology. I'm not a geologist. I don't know what all of this means. There's glacial striations, maybe, but I can't explain what that is. But I do know that this really flat nearshore landscape produces shallow pools, which are beloved by waterfowl. This is really, really good waterfowl habitat all throughout here. And we'll see things like brant. This is a species of geese called a brant, and we often would spook them from enjoying their shallow little mucky flats and fly by and give us a good view. There's also scattered about the shore sandy beaches, which are beautiful and produce some really interesting sea life bivalves washing up on shore, but are also really good foraging for shorebirds and gulls. They will just flock along. You'll see them in big white lines along these sandy beaches. And this is a photo of some of the shorebirds that we were seeing in Hesquiat. This is a lot of surfbirds in here. There's dunlin and also some black turnstones, if you can pick them out. In the interior of the peninsula, there are dense dense forests with really well-developed understories of salal. So a lot of old growth, both in trees, also in salal. And it's beautiful. It gives the appearance of kind of a wall of conifers that's impenetrable. And as you go further in, it definitely peters out and there's more bogs. But it's this beautiful habitat that you would think would have so many maybe owls or raptors. I wish that I could put a photo of an owl that we found in Hesquiat here, but after extensive surveys, especially for western screech owl, which we were told by an owl biologist, I quote, "The place should be filthy with owls," but we never did find any after many years of really intense efforts. There are lots of bald eagles in that forest, but no raptors and no owls. So that's the place where this work will take place. And the next 3 years were all about herring. We came away from our marbled murrelet work with some good insights into what the next kind of big bird thing could be to explore in the area. And again, the caretaker, Diane Ignis, told us come back for the herring spawn. And so we did. I'll introduce herring for people that might not know what that means outside of a tinned fish that you can buy at the grocery store. They are delicious, and that's why they're so important. They are one of a member of a very important group in the food web on the coast called forage fish. And there's kind of three really important fish in this group on the Pacific coast. One of them is Pacific herring, and also surf smelt. You can see a photo. They're like small golden silvery fish, and they spawn year round and kind of float in bait balls out throughout the Pacific. So they're really good forage for a lot of different animals. Also Pacific sand lance, which are these kind of weird eel-looking fish that spend up to 6 months of their life buried in the sand. And then they also form these bait balls. So forage fish are the basis of food chains from Alaska to California, and they're small enough to be predated upon by all sorts of different creatures, from whales to birds to sea lions. And they often congregate in these large groups that form bait balls for gulls and whales and everything to dive into. Herring are different from the other forage fish on the coast because they spawn regularly at a pretty reliable time of year and create this big ecological phenomenon. A lot of people don't know about the herring run in the same way that they know about the salmon run, but it really is. Herring are for spring what salmon are for fall and autumn. They produce this incredible concentration of nutrients that all sorts of animals flock to. They are historically one of the smallest fish that have been harvested along the coast, but are super, super important cultural and traditional food. And in the spawn season, they're very beautiful. They can fit in the palm of your hand. They're about 7 inches long. The females get very fat with eggs, and the males get fat with milt. And the scales on their bellies thin out, and they get this very beautiful sheen to them. They look like mermaids to me. If you ever see a fish that's silvery, that's kind of splashing around in the water and gives you just a glimpse of a silvery flash, it's probably a herring. This is where the presentation gets sad for a second, and I won't dwell too long on this because it deserves an entire presentation to itself at the very least. But herring have suffered a collapse in their stocks because of a massive commercial fishing industry that opened up after the Second World War, mostly purse seine fishery. So they are caught in really huge numbers during the spawning season. And on the left, this is a graph of the different stocks that are managed by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. There's the Haida Gwaii stock, the North Coast stock on Vancouver Island, the West Coast stock, which includes those found in Hesquiat, and then the Central Coast. And the Strait of Georgia is the only herring stock that remains commercially fished to this day because the others just have too small populations to sustain a commercial harvest. I'm going to show you a little video of this purse seine fishery.
On the Seine, they're hauled up in small nets and bailed directly into the ship's hold. Scoop after scoop. A tremendous harvest. But the end product is not a nice fresh herring on the breakfast table. These catches north of Vancouver are destined to become fish meal fertilizer and fish oil for industrial use. For these purposes, they certainly need herrings by the million.
that video was, gosh, don't look at my suggested. I promise it's the algorithm. That video was filmed at kind of the height of herring harvest, commercial harvest. And this is a map of data directly from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans of different subpopulations that were actively harvested from the period of 1960 to 1980. So it's just zoomed in. Obviously, there are a lot more populations along the coast. It's zoomed into Vancouver Island. And you can see these are reported spawns. And at this time, I believe all stocks were open. And I'm going to move to the next slide, which is 2010 to the present day. And you can see the reduction in all of these small subpopulations. There's far, far fewer on the South Island as well as on the north coast of the island. And really the stronghold remains this Strait of Georgia spawn. In the graph that I showed you, those were the large stock assessment areas that are used by DFO are not considering all of these smaller populations that are seen on the map here. You can see there's two dots kind of just near where I am on the Lekwungen territories. And those were just over the past 2 years, there were spawns right by Fisgard Lighthouse, really, really small spawns that were not harvestable even by the Songhees Nation. And that population was studied in the 90s and determined to be genetically distinct. All of these populations, these subpopulations, these dots that you see are probably genetically distinct in the same way that salmon runs are genetically distinct to their rivers. And it's just not how stocks are managed. So a lot of these populations have unfortunately declined or completely been snuffed out. Here's a quote from Wasanich elder Dave Elliott, who, this is from the book Saltwater People, and he just describes the abundance that came in with the herring spawn. So while our people were busy harvesting the herring and herring spawn, they were also living well on spring salmon. They lived well on the salmon that come with the herring. Also, ducks came at the same time. Thousands of ducks came in those days. So many would come that they would darken the sky. They would blot out the sun like a big dark cloud. I've heard also a lot of people who described the abundance of herring in Lekwungen and Wasanich territory as so thick, the oceans were so thick that you could walk on the backs of the herring and cross the ocean. And having been at a herring spawn now, I can believe it. It's almost not hyperbole to imagine that there were just so many of these fish that the water was thick with them. All of this is just I want to point out how important herring have been, not only as an ecological resource, but also as a cultural resource. The place that I'm presenting from on Lekwungen territories and the place where a lot of this research took place on Hesquiat territories, they're both named after herring. Lekwungen is the place to smoke herring, or I've also heard place of smoked herring, and Hesquiat is named I don't know the direct translation, so I'm not going to try, but I know that part of the name comes from the sound of pulling herring roe on eelgrass through your teeth, which we did a lot of. It's very delicious. There's a picture of some herring roe on eelgrass, freshly drawn up from the bottom with an anchor. I'm going to play a short video of an Ahousaht man named Cliff Atleo, describing his impression of the herring stocks on Nuchanolth territory, if it loads.
I really believe the turnaround can only happen if we have a government-to-government relationship with Canada, and we are respected accordingly, and we actually have joint management. there needs to be a change of mindset about how to manage the resources. And by that, I mean it can't be single focused on the value, the economic value. Any natural resource you look at, because the exploitation has been based on the value and the return generated by that value, they're all in trouble. They're all in trouble, and that's because they don't pay attention to actually looking after resources for future generations, which is the value that we have as First Nations people. Because it doesn't make sense to just take and take and take some more than you need, because the result and the evidence is all around us that that does not work for natural resources.
Okay. So herring spawns have been important to the Coast Salish peoples for a very long time. They've also been around for a very long time. About 50 million years ago, a herring spawn was inhabited by things like this, one of the earliest seabirds, Anthropornis. It's about the size of a human being. And also this smaller seabird, Delphinornis. There were nautilus eating the herring spawn, and also large whales like basilosaurids. All of this is recorded in the fossil record. And I've gone to the effort of creating a paleontological representation of what a herring spawn could have looked like back then. You can make fun of my graphic design. It's okay, I'm not an artist. But just to give your brain some space to creatively imagine what a herring spawn could have looked like. And nowadays, it's honestly not that different. We've got actually the opalescent squid that inhabit our offshores come in and eat herring at the herring spawn time of year. All sorts of mammals, marine and also terrestrial, eat herring. And then, of course, there are birds. So the Herring Project had three main goals. We wanted to gather the first ecological profile of what a full spawn looks like. So we really dug our heels in, and we were going to stay there for a month at a time and understand how the herring spawn shapes up, if there's different birds that come in at different times. We also wanted to form relationships that could that we could continue to have this incredible opportunity to visit remote areas in undersurveyed areas of Vancouver Island and perform bird surveys, and also hopefully support with scientific data trends that caretakers are seeing who live on the land year-round. So I'm going to talk now about these kind of three important periods that we saw. There's a pre-spawn period, and before the spawn happens, obviously, as the name recalls. And then there's the spawn, this big bombastic event, and then there's a post-spawn period as well. And all of these have different birds that come in at different times. So the pre-spawn period, it's the end of winter, and you can kind of feel everything getting antsy. The birds are getting antsy, so are the mammals, so are the human beings, and the weather starts changing. Herring spawn weather to me feels like every weather type in the span of 10 minutes, which is something we regularly got in Hesquiat. So it would be hailing and raining, really, really, really loud. Then you would get kind of this beautiful rainbow, double rainbow, the best rainbow you've ever seen. And then suddenly it's a beautiful clear day and you're going to get your first sunburn of the year. And you can feel this anticipation growing. At this time, you get lots of birds coming into the harbor, not always staying, kind of coming in and checking it out. And you'll see things shaping up at this time. There are a couple of abiotic factors that do play into a herring spawn. So why do herring spawn in March? And these are the four that, after talking to people and doing some research, we identified as possibly the most important. Herring like it when you are far from a full moon. So they like having easy tides, because when the full moon comes, there's these massive tides, and they prefer being further away from that period so they can have easy water. They like spawning at a high tide. I don't particularly know why this is. but they seem to enjoy, maybe it's kind of coming further with making sure that they're over the eelgrass beds that their eggs attach to. You also have to wait for the females to get the correct egg to body mass ratio. So slowly females' bodies will fill up with eggs. And if a spawn happens before the females are ready, it might just be males depositing their milt into the water rather than an actual herring spawn. And then ideally there's also sun or at least mild weather. We found this to not be totally true, but herring seem to prefer if there's kind of calm water and a nice day to bring their children into the new world. All of that is, you know, kind of conjecture, and we're ultimately at the whim and fancy of the herring. But when the herring decide that it's time, you will know, because the birds and the mammals know before you do, and you can watch what they're doing. The first thing that I noticed this year, which was new for this year, is there's an incredible smell that takes over the harbor. And you walk along the beach and you actually see this kind of frothy slime washing up. And I didn't know what it was at first, but it's fish slime, just from the abundance of fish coming into the harbor. And you can smell it in the air above water, and ultimately you can see this kind of like, yeah, just bodies of herring washing all of their strange fluids out onto the sea. There's also sea lion rafts and humpback whales that'll show up at this time. Humpbacks feed on fish. Unlike gray whales, they will eat adult fish. So if you see humpbacks in the harbor, you know that's a good sign there's going to be fish in the harbor. Sea lions will start playing out in the water, waiting for their time to come, rather than just lounging on the beach like they love to, lazing around. You'll start to see gulls whirling in tornadoes over the water, kind of checking out what they can see under the waves. You'll see lots of gulls. And you'll also see bigger gulls. So the smaller gulls, like, sorry for the shorthand here, but short-billed gulls, move off because they don't want to be involved in what's about to happen, because what's about to happen is very big. Spawn time is chaotic. There are gulls everywhere. There are mammals in the water, breaching out of the water. It looks like this from above. It's this kind of milty excretion that's the sperm, that will ultimately settle to rest on the eggs that the females are depositing on the eelgrass beds. Here's a shot of Hesquiat Harbor spawn. This is by DFO. One of their monitoring programs is flying over and taking shots from the air. They also now have started taking shots from space. So herring spawn is something that you can see from space. It's so colorful. It's really hard to describe the color, but it just gets turquoisey and milky out of nowhere all of a sudden. This is the boat survey that we do once the spawn kicks off. So when the spawn kicks off, it's time for us to get in the water. And we will circumnavigate the whole harbor, count all the gulls that are there, and then tally up our results once we get back to our lovely, lovely field house back home. So I'll talk a bit about what our boat surveys look like and what you need to do a boat survey. The most important thing that you need to do a boat survey is, well, the two most important things are having a good skipper who knows the waters and having a good scribe who can take down your gibberish when you're counting gulls by the thousands. So this is Jeff Ignis, who lives full-time in Hesquiat, along with his mother, Diane, who's the caretaker I mentioned earlier, and then Ava Noringseth, who was my fieldwork buddy this year and also was around for the last year's field season. So other than two reliable people, you'll need one of these bad boys. It's a clicker counter. Ideally, you have two in your hands at all times. I have felt the trigger finger forming from how often you use these. You need them to count everything you're seeing so that you don't have to use your brain for anything except going, that's a gull, that's a gull, that's a gull. You'll need all weather right in the rain in case things get nasty out on the water, because they definitely can on the West Coast. And you'll need your very reliable binoculars. So once you're on the water, this central triangle is the boat that we are on, and it's ideal to have 2 observers on a boat, one that can count on the left side and one that can count on the right side. And this is to reduce double counting, or and also to make sure that you count all the birds that are there. But you can't just count every bird you see, because the birds are going by very fast. So the way that we count birds is kind of by groups of estimates. So if Ava's on the right side, she'll be counting all of these birds probably by groups of 5. So she'll look at 5 and then stamp it over to the larger group here and go, okay, 5, 10, 20, and kind of figure out an estimate of how many birds are there. So maybe there's 30 birds on this side. And she'll also, or I will be on the other side, counting these black and yellow dots and also getting a composition estimate. So you're counting gulls and birds, and you're also making sure that you know what species are there. So now that you know how to count birds in a herring spawn, I want you to test your counting skills out. This isn't a workshop, but I just thought it would be fun since we all know how to survey a herring spawn now. I'm going to show you some pictures, and I want you to do your best to count what birds are there. I'll give you 15 seconds to be nice about it. The first one's going to be easy, and then they'll get harder as we go on. So they're going to be overhead photos of birds, and I'll give you the first one now. Okay, you have 15 seconds. How many birds are there? Did anybody get 58? Did you get close? If you used that by 5s method, maybe you got close. This is a nice small group, so you can't count them individually probably in 15 seconds when you're moving that fast, but you can count them by 5s. Okay, let's try one a little bit harder. You have 15 seconds again. We're a little bit further away. Did anybody get close to 107? It gets tricky as they get in bigger numbers and you do a lot of undercounting. This one you might have wanted to count by 10s maybe because there's more. Okay, next one, last one. Okay, time's up. That was 1,341. And this is more like the numbers that we are seeing when we're out on the water, except that we're not above them. It's nicer to do it when you're above them. Oh, and if you want to keep testing your counting skills, this is where I got all these screen caps from. There's this fun little game that you can play called Flock Estimator. If you Google FWS, Fish and Wildlife Service Flock Estimator. This is more likely what we're seeing when we're counting. So there's a lot of depth and the gulls are moving fast and you're moving fast. Once you get into them, it's a lot harder. There's gulls moving over your head to the right and it gets very chaotic, but we do our best to get these estimates and get a good number, get a good estimate of what species of birds are around here. So this is just a nice shot of what the milky water, I like this one on the left because it really shows how much the water changes. And I'll play this video. That's me and Ava off work time. That's not us doing counts. We're much more when we're actually at work. And so because of all of this chaos, for the first 10 days of this year, Ava and I actually, this is a shot of how far Ava and I walked in about a week and a half because we were so busy being on the water and counting every gull that we saw. Our field house is in there, and we were so completely occupied by the spawn. It's an all-consuming event. So the post-spawn period, it means that it's time to eat herring roe, and everybody loves herring roe. Quackmas is the Hesquiat name for herring roe on eelgrass. On the left, there's a bear and also gulls foraging on the same beach that a wolf will be foraging later in the day. An incredible thing about the spawn is that it brings together all of these animals that are usually so much further apart. And it's kind of this like just a complete, because of the abundance, all of these barriers to being near each other, all of this niche partitioning just completely dissolves for a very short period of time. We will also eat quackmas at this time, and we'll also catch herring if we're lucky and split them open. Sorry if this is gory for everybody, and eat their delicious egg sacs. Oh my gosh, so good. Fried in a pan with butter and garlic and soy sauce. During the post-spawn period is when ducks will start coming around, those ducks that are diving for eggs rather than hunting the fish themselves. So in this shot, we have some scaup and surf scoters. And also after the spawn is when the loons come. And I don't particularly know why this is, because loons are definitely fish eaters. I don't know why they come in after the spawn. We never saw them during the spawn or before. But there they come, just a mystery that remains unsolved. So I'm going to highlight some of the birds that we saw and just give you kind of a profile of some of the big players. Mostly they were gulls, scoters, and cormorants, and they form the basis of the Hesquiat IBA. So not only marbled murrelets, but now some other birds are here in enough abundance. We've done the surveys to prove that they are now these species that support the establishment of an important bird area, and those are called threshold or trigger species. And then I'll highlight a couple of non-trigger species that weren't in huge numbers, but were still unexpected for the area. Another great thing about spending so much time in one small place is that I got to know these species really well, and I like to think that I got to know them well enough to give them nicknames. So I'm going to give you kind of like personalities for each of these gulls. Glaucous-winged gulls are the keeners of the herring spawn. They are, first of all, the most common gull that we have in the North Pacific on the coast. They also were always sticking around when the other gulls had left. They just love to be there. They're putting in overtime. A fun fact about glaucous-winged gulls is that they love to hybridize with every similar looking gull that they can find, and there's a lot of interesting hybrids of different species because of that trend that they have. And this little table shows our high count for the spawn this year. So at our height, we saw 4,800 glaucous-winged gulls in one day, and that's 1% of the global population. And that is the baseline of what a species can be to trigger this IBA. So if you have 1% or more of the global or national population, then you can use it to support IBA status. So we just got there with these guys. There are also a lot of California gulls. These guys are the jocks. They are super active. I almost never saw them on the beach unless it was a really bad day. They love flying around. They're consistently out there in really good numbers. They're always out there practicing their rounds. Also, fun fact about California gulls, they're the oldest known gull in North America. There was an individual that was banded and was found dead at 44 years old. Crazy. At our height, at the peak of the California gull count, we counted 4,300, which is 2.5% of the national population. So Canada doesn't hold a very large amount of the global population. There's a lot in the US as well, but still a good percent of national population. Iceland gulls are an interesting one. I'm calling these the nerd because they confuse me and I feel like they know a lot more about what's going on with them than what we know. They have a very confusing subspecies complex that I'm not going to get into because I don't know anything about it. I couldn't give you any answers and we don't have time. But there's a lot of different subspecies that look very similar. This one that I have a picture of is a Thayer's gull, one of the subspecies. And that's the one that we most commonly saw at the spawn. We saw 3.8% of the global population of Iceland gulls, which is a huge amount. Like 4% of the population of any species being at this tiny peninsula is absurd. And it is absurd probably because the estimates in their breeding grounds are less than those seen yearly on Vancouver Island. So every year, observers, birders, see more of these gulls than official surveys can find of them on their breeding grounds. So there's a lot that we don't know about these guys. They also don't vocalize, as far as we know. Mysterious fellas. Surf scoters was another threshold species. They're called kuhu in the Hesquiat language. They arrive in really big numbers after the spawn because they feed on eggs. There's a little mystery with these guys. I'd love to hear if anybody knows what's going on here, if you have any experience with surf scoters in the spawn. They would all leave in these huge streams right before sunset. And we would just see like lines, black lines crossing the harbor and going back out to sea. No idea what's going on there. But if you do, please message me. We saw 1.9% of the global population of surf scoters with a high count of 12,000. Thank you very much. That took a lot of effort from Ava and I to get up to that count, and our eyes were bleeding by the end of it. The final threshold species that we have for the Hesquiat IBA after all of this research is a Brandt's cormorant. They're one of 3 cormorants that breed on our coast. They're very vulnerable, especially when they're breeding. The threshold for breeding populations to support an IBA is like 18 individuals, just because they're so vulnerable at these breeding sites, apparently. But in non-breeding conditions, like in the winter when we saw them, we saw 3,000 of them milling about in the harbor, which is 2% of the population, global population. These are just a couple of shout outs to species that weren't in huge numbers, but were really unexpected. If you know anything about herring gulls, the name is a misnomer. They don't come around for the herring spawn very often, but we had a lot of them this year, around 300 at the highest, which was really big numbers for the West Coast. I'm calling them the bully just because they look really mean. And also they will eat smaller birds and mammals like rabbits and squirrels. Scary. I wouldn't want to be smaller than them. In 2024, our big unexpected gull of the year was the black-legged kittiwake. And it was unexpected because these are pelagic seabirds. They spend all of their time out on the open ocean. They really don't come to shore at all except to breed. But we saw a lot of them. Hundreds would come in and apparently forage on the herring spawn. This was not reflected this year. We were sad to not see these little guys. They're very cute. But 2024 was a great year for them. And a fun fact about them is that they have no hind toe, because why do you need toes when you're out on the open ocean flying all the time? So really quickly, I'm going to show you some data here. These are our gull numbers between years. And this data was gathered on our morning sea watches. So you can see we conducted these throughout all of March in both years. We would get up at sunrise and count birds as they came into the harbor. And this is our gull numbers from those counts. The red lines represent the spawn dates. So in 2024, the spawn occurred on March 15th. And in 2025, there was a spawn on March 2nd and also on March 22nd. 2024 has much more presence throughout the season, but it's not as many gulls as there were in 2025. So there's this kind of hanging around that we didn't see in 2025. Gull numbers are hovering between like 1,500 and 3,500 during the whole period of March. And rather than in 2025, there's a bigger spawn. So we reached 7,500 gulls during this first spawn period on March 2nd, but they leave really quickly and don't reach those peak numbers again. We also unfortunately didn't get the pre-spawn period that we were hoping to gather in 2025 just because we got there too late and the herring wanted to get going quicker than we thought they would. An interesting thing to come out of this is kind of fine-tuning what are the factors that influence the spawn timing of herring. So the blue line is the full moon on both of these years. And you can see that for both years, the herring have spaced their spawns well away from that full moon. In 2024, it was 10 days before the full moon. And then in 2025, 12 days before, as well as 7 days after. And this makes us think that maybe of the abiotic cues that I mentioned earlier, this being far away from the full moon and having slower tides, lighter tides that don't rush the eggs around as much might be the most important factor determining when herring spawn during this February-March season. These are some graphs of birds that we saw on the water, so total birds that we saw on the water, all encompassed. The first graph is total birds that we saw on the day of the spawn. So in 2023, there were around 11,000, 2024, a little bit less, 2025, less than 2023, but still a good number. And an interesting thing that we noticed this year is that we didn't actually hit our peak number of birds seen in the total in the harbor on the day of the spawn, which was true in 2023 and in 2024. We actually saw more birds on the water 10 days after the spawn had occurred, which is what's shown in orange here, than we did on spawn day. So our peak bird numbers ended up being around 19,000, but they didn't show up. There was some sort of lag. Then they didn't get the message. They didn't get the page in time that the spawn was happening, and they showed up quite a bit later this year. This is a back of the napkin calculation of the amount of fish that were herring that were in the harbor on spawn day in 2024 and 2025. This is from the Hesquiat Fisheries does sounding tests every kind of few days throughout the season, and their tonnage estimates translated into this calculation of how many millions of fish were in the bay. So in 2024, there were around 3 million fish. In 2025, there were about 3.8 million fish. And this is, not at all scientific. This is really just a back of the napkin calculation, but it does support what people have been seeing. There's been a moratorium on herring fishing on the West Coast for almost 10 years now, and it seems like some of the populations at least are rebounding really well, and Hesquiat is one of those, hopefully. A couple more shout outs, and then we're almost done here. I just want to point out some non-avian interesting sightings that we had. One of them is that will probably excite a lot of people is these really high gray whale numbers. So high that we almost had to forget about them to focus on our job. This picture by Ava, I'm not sure if she was actually taking a picture of the gray whale or if she was trying to take a picture of the black scoter that is viewed on the right side of the frame. Because you just had to forget about them at some point. There were so many of them, 10 to 40 in the harbor at any given time. They love to rub up on the sandy shorelines, and they also are bottom feeders, so they will shove their heads through the sand and silt and eat herring roe. So gray whales, super abundant in Hesquiat. We have no idea what to do with all this data. If anybody wants it, please give me a call, because I would love to give it to somebody who's interested in whale research. This is an exciting find that we confirmed this year of, I know, it's a dead plant that Liam is holding, but bear with me. This is a bulrush that was reported by an ethnobotanist that visited Hesquiat in the 1970s. And she was the only one to have seen it and confirmed it up until we went and confirmed it. And it's interesting because its population is in the Okanagan. There is what we call a disjunct population of this bulrush that just occurs in Hesquiat Lake. And the nearest known population is in the Okanagan. Very strange. No idea what's going on there, but it was really fun to be able to confirm this out of place grass. We found some freshwater mussels this year as well, near the lake by our field house. Freshwater mussels are one of the most they're in heavy decline everywhere in North America. They're very endangered as a group, so it was really nice to see this western floater, and just kind of bolsters my picture of Hesquiat as a beautiful, very rich and very healthy ecosystem. This is, again, I'm going to have to convince you why to care about this. It's just a little story of another interesting find that plagued us last year. This is a tiny lichen called seaside centipede lichen, which was formerly known from very few sites in Vancouver Island. And after the very hard work of very talented lichenologists, we were able to find like 300 new specimens of it. And it's this tiny lichen that has kind of urn-shaped, I don't know what to call them, urn-shaped lichen parts. It's really interesting to look at, but anyway, that guy is also doing well in Hesquiat. And finally, I mentioned at the beginning that Hesquiat is kind of this arm that sticks out into the Pacific, and that it might collect interesting things, birds that are blown up on winds coming from the south, but also things that are blown up in the currents that come from the south. And this is a trend that we saw in the beach life in Hesquiat. This is my friend Sean, who's a very talented insect naturalist. And he found this small isopod that is known from Oregon and California. It's called a crowned drift clinger, which is a great name because probably the way that it got here was clinging to a piece of driftwood. And it just happened that the driftwood, the first place that it hit land after California or whatever, was this little peninsula. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the presentation. I want to round up some takeaways that I'm hoping you have. I wanted to let all the birders in the crowd know that herring spawns are excellent places to visit. They are just the perfect way to come out of the winter. They concentrate winter birds and sometimes bring in rare visitors. They're very beautiful, and I feel like they're kind of an underlooked component of the yearly cycle on the coast, and I hope more people go out and visit them next year. Another takeaway that I have is that Indigenous stewardship is so important for especially in remote areas. Like, we would never have known that all of this was happening, that we would never been able to gather all of this data if Diane hadn't reached out to us and said, hey, I've noticed some weird stuff happening around here. And it all fell out from there. So we have entirely her to thank for that. And Indigenous caretakers are the people on the land year round. They have the best understanding of these areas that they're living in, and they are the ones that can really inform conservation. Herring conservation is a really key component of maintaining the health and diversity of the coast. They are a food source for so many animals, and they provide this incredible boost after a long winter for animals that need energy before they go and create the next generation and they go into their breeding stage. And also that small community projects like this are worth funding. We were just a bunch of young people with very little experience in the field, but because we had passion and made time for it, we got to do some incredible things. And because we knew some incredible people as well. This is just a shout out to a new society that I would love everybody to check out. It's an organization called the Herring Conservation and Restoration Society that is just formed on the South Island, that is dedicated to herring conservation and are trying to drum up new ideas for how to conserve herring, this dwindling population of herring on the South Island as well as the island in a whole. So please check them out. They have meetings and they have incredible, yeah, they got a lot of incredible things to say. These are the people, some of them that I would like to thank. These are our volunteers. I'd like to thank Andreas, who was one of our first volunteers, who's now biking across Europe, as I understand it. But he was really in it from the beginning. There he is taking a picture of a pickle. Thank you to Vic Ritchie. Thank you to Steph. Thank you to Liam. Thank you to Blair, who was not a volunteer, but one of the surveyors from our 2024 herring spawn surveys. To Eva Ahlstrom and Abby Hyde, to Sean Brescia and Jack Bindernagel, and also to, I'm forgetting his last name, but thank you to Mark Swanson. Couple more people that I'd like to thank. Jeff, Corianne, and Diane Ignis are the caretakers of Hesquiat. They live there year round. None of this would have been possible without them. They took care of us. They made sure that we were fed and supplied and weren't going to kill ourselves by walking out on the beach at the wrong time. They are good friends, and I really hope to continue the work there with them. Thank you to Bill and Marianne Webster, who were our suppliers, our means of getting to Hesquiat. Bill is an excellent skipper. And thank you to Leo Air for flying us out last minute this year when we couldn't get the boat in. Thank you to our funders, BC Nature, ECCC, Raincoast Education, Clayoquot Biosphere Trust, BC Marine Trails, Birds Canada, and BC Field Ornithologists. And a final thank you to Liam Reagan and Ava Noringseth, who were in this from the very beginning and we're in it for all 4 years of this. I'm so happy to have done this work with you, and it's such a joy to be your friend. That's it.
That was fantastic, Hannah. Well worth the wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What an interesting series of years you've had there. Now, I have a question that I've been dying to ask since about the middle there. In the pre-spawn, there was a photo of, I think it was you coming along the boardwalk. Was that a bear behind you? Or whoever the person was? Was there a bear
No. Yes, I know the one you're talking about. That is not a bear, but a menace. That's the dog that lives on the reservation. His name is Whitaker. He loves scaring shorebirds before you have the chance to.
I suspect so. Anyway, yeah, I thought, does she not know there's a bear right behind her? Okay.
That would be an incredible thing to find out after all that.
And if anybody has a question in the Zoom room, please put up your hand or unmute yourself and ask your question. And I'll just see if there's anybody in the physical room here that has any questions. And nobody here. How about online? I saw that there was at least one new comment. Okay, Liam has a question.
I was just going to ask, for anyone interested in getting up to Hesquiat, has anyone built a cabin up there that people could stay at if they wanted to go bird one of the western facing peninsulas in the fall and get a ton of mega rarities?
Has anyone built one, or is anyone wanting to build one? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, a bit of an inside joke with Hannah there. Hannah, do you want to?
Okay.
Liam's he's doing nepotism in the questions part of or he's trying to network. Get him out of here.
What? No, I'm not. I'm saying people can go stay at the Ignises because they built that cabin for people to come stay at.
So there is a cabin in case people would like to go and stay.
There is a brand new cabin, which is much nicer than the one that we were staying in for 3 years.
There are several people saying it was an excellent talk, including Ava. So I do have a question in the room here, Rod.
So how does one go and stay there for a few days?
Okay, follow-up question, I guess, to Liam and Anna. So if someone in the room here did want to go and stay, how would they contact the people involved?
Well, you can message me, I think is the best way to do it. Yeah, they run, so the Ignises, they are right on the trail that runs along the Hesquiat Peninsula. So they have hikers come through and stay in the same field house that we stayed in, but they've just built a new one that's kind of targeted at surfers. It's at this great, as I understand it, point break where surfers like to come in the summer. And I think they have an Instagram for that, but I wouldn't trust them to monitor it very often. So if you're interested in connecting with them, they definitely host people for a fee to stay in their cabins, and I'd love to connect you with them.
Okay, Rod has a long history with Middle Natch Island, so he's used to roughing it. Can you drive there, or do you have to get in by boat or plane?
Yeah, you have to get in by boat, or you can also take a float plane that lands on the lake, or a helicopter like we did, but the easiest way is by boat from Tofino. It's about an hour and a half boat ride from Tofino, which is really, really beautiful, and lots of great birding on the way up there too.
Okay, there are a couple of questions in your chat. Now, one was,
look at
what
them.
was your favorite bird you saw there over the years?
Something that I cut out of the presentation is my most proud moment in birding possibly is taking a selfie with a black swift. So in 2022, as we were leaving, there was just this huge congregation of feeding black swift, which are a really rare bird to see. We saw 70 of them. It was so just staggering to see them in those numbers, and I got close enough to them that I could take a little selfie, and there was one above my head flying by. So that's
Nice.
one of my proudest moments.
Okay, and a double question here. Did herring ever spawn on the Saanich Peninsula or in Saanich Inlet? And if so, do you think they'll come back?
Yeah, they definitely did, and still do in really, really small numbers. Yes, there's the history of herring all along that is that they were present all along Vancouver Island. The stocks on the South Island especially have been really, really hard hit by overfishing. Getting them back, it's a difficult question because there's not a lot of science on these subpopulations. Like whether like salmon, they kind of know whether to come back to one spot, how they choose a spot. So once the population is gone from that spawning location, it's possible that they won't come back until they just happen to find it again. But there are still small spawns in Saanich Inlet that you could probably go see, and they are not fished because they are too small. But yeah, the resurgence of herring is it's a multi-factor thing. One of them is definitely fishing. There's also like development and pollution in eelgrass beds to consider. If you want to know more about threats facing herring, I highly recommend that you check out the Herring Restoration and Conservation Society that I mentioned at the end of the talk. They've got a lot of great resources, and you'll probably learn a lot more from them and be able to engage with them.
Ava has commented that people are welcome to contact you, Ava, or Liam about the cabin, and you guys try and connect. Now, obviously, I have your email addresses, but there's people here who don't. So if one of you would like to put an email address in the chat that people could use, that would be awesome.
There's that was a direct message.
You sent it to someone who already has it, didn't you?
I sent it to Liam for some reason. I will send my email, and yeah, if anybody has any more questions about this topic or anything you'd like to ask me, you can send me an email.
Okay. Any other questions before we call it a night and a season? Because no birders night now until next September. And I was just trying to think if there's a marine night. I don't even think there's a marine night this coming up. I think oh, there is one. Yes, on Monday night, there is a marine night for VNHS, and I'm afraid I don't know what it is, but if you go to naturevictoria.ca or vicnhs.bc.ca and go to their calendar, you'll be able to find out the topic for marine night.
It's about rockfish vocalizations as part of it.
Okay, it's awesome. Rod knows. It's about rockfish vocalizations. So if you want to know what the fish said, you can you can check that out. Okay, so thank you so much for the talk, and it was fantastic, and as I say, well worth the wait. Thank you, everybody, and there are activities going on throughout the summer by Nature Victoria and also Rocky Point Bird Observatory. So, you know, we won't be having these meetings, but there will be many Zoom presentations. Don't forget Victoria Bird Week, May 10th to 17th. And if we don't see you before, we'll see you in September. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Anne.
Hannah.